This is an article that came out in Atlanta Black Star that says 6 reasons why the so-called diverse cast of Tut miniseries is still a whitewash of ancient Egyptian history. And I'm going to subtitle this. This is where blacks are actually giving something that they never were in history, and they still are mad about it. And this, of course, has got to do with the was Kangs was Egyptian thing. And we're going to get into this as we go. She says, her name's just Olivia. Since the beginning of modern history, there has been an attempt to whitewash the history of ancient Egypt. No, there's been great detail trying to figure out exactly everything about ancient Egypt, but she goes on. Many Egyptologists, historians, and archaeologists and filmmakers have made attempts to separate ancient Egypt from the continent of Africa and sever the link that connects to the region to black excellence and act directly inspired by white supremacy. Oh, so she couldn't get a couple of sentences in before she tries to crack that lie out there. Not that all these Egyptologists are trying to lie. It's actually the black people who are trying to lie and say that somehow West African primitives were actually the Caucasian Egyptians, which has already been verified and proved over and over again, simplistically with craniometry and hair samples of all the earliest of dynasties, and even the crystal blue eyes they have in the earliest of dynasties statues and the reserve heads and things, but even genetically from mid kingdom on down through, hoping to see some kind of difference whenever the Greeks and everything came in, and they find it starts out with little to no Negroid DNA whatsoever, and the amount that shows up is really at the very end and is looked at as being from Islamic slavery. And so then again, we see the only time of interjection of Negroids. It's kind of like saying they were the Americans, and you go, no, it was already started up, and then after the 1600s were going good, just a few black people got brought over, and it slowly went from there. But man, there were Irish slaves way before then, and the white people that made up we the people in America and stuff. So it's kind of odd that they try to pull these types of things. But yeah, he calls it white supremacy. We call it afrocentrism or nigrocentrism, and it's gotten to be quite pathetic where they want to claim they were the Bible people, they were Egypt, they were the Moors, they were any of those Caucasian societies, but definitely not claiming West African primitives. Although black scholars have forced modern Egyptologists to revisit the false narrative told by their predecessors, Hollywood has insisted on maintaining this trend by causing Caucasians to betray ancient Egyptians. Well, the ancient Egyptians were Caucasians, and even though blacks have come out with things, then it really just got investigated more, totally debunked, and now they don't have any room to stand on anymore. Even more information in the positive of the Caucasian and in the negative of the Negroid whatsoever. And amazingly, they stand on top of a pile of poo and attempt to think that they still have something to stand on. It's odd as hell, but many in the media have praised the makers of Spike TV's Tut for deviating from this trend by actually putting some blacks even someplace where they weren't even at in ancient times. For even the Nubians weren't even allowed to come into Egypt by decree and stuff, and there were no others. But we're going to find out that they actually gave them a role that's definitely ancient Caucasians, known as Aryans and everything too of ancient times, which is kind of strange, but they still aren't happy if they don't get called Egyptian. So it shows you the disconnect. And they even threw some people that are in Egyptian garb with blacks and let them kind of mimic the Egyptians, showing you that that's kind of what's going on now to Dunch. And it kind of really relays to the reality of wannabeism and stuff. However, the 6 reasons below, which he's fixing to go into, demonstrate the supposedly diverse cast of the miniseries is a continuation of the white supremacist tactic of whitewashing the ancient Egyptian narrative and disregarding black contributors to the human civilization. Well, Africa was named Africa after Caucasians. All of North Africa was endemic Caucasians all the way through till the end, where Islamic slave trade comes in and the Moors and everything, and how they had eventually with camels able to go down and Whoopsie. You look at all the Herodotus maps and they don't even actually know sub-Saharan Africa exists. You could try to claim some Nilotic, the people that live there, but as far as the Bantu Congoids, we know about their expansion, and of course they didn't even know Egypt existed. And this is the people that are hopping up and down mad trying to say we, as if it contained them somehow, whenever it's Caucasian Egyptians that didn't even let the Negroids that they're not even related to remotely, the Nubians. So we'll go into this as we do, but she goes on that these 6 reasons below will show supposedly the diverse cast of the miniseries is a continuation of white supremacist active of whitewashing the ancient Egyptian narrative and disregarding black contributions to human civilization. And man, I'm sorry to break it to you, but we actually don't have any. They've literally been the most primitive people that we ever found, kind of separated and different. And due to their level of development and IQ levels past that point, even with clear examples, they've become a burden to humanity, and they really weren't any of these people in any way, shape, or form. And I wish that you'd quit trying to claim it, because it looks pathetic where you keep trying to put yourself into situations that you didn't even know existed. So, ancient Egypt portrayed as a melting pot rather than black African empire. Well, why would they put it as a black African empire? It's not Negroids, it's Caucasians. I'm fixing to show that to you. After renowned scholars Cheikh Ante Diop, debunked totally, and Theophile Obenga, also debunked totally, presented overwhelming evidence from anthropology, blood groups, iconography, ancient written sources, melanin test, and the significance of the word Kemet, proving the Africanness of Egypt. Many Eurocentric and Arab institutions still find it difficult to accept Egypt as primarily black civilization. And I would go on to say, totally debunked. The anthropology and forensics shows no. The blood groups and actual haplotypes and everything shows no. The iconography shows non-phenotype of a Negroid whatsoever, regardless of color of skin, which red ochre and light pale women is seen in the Greeks as well as Egypt and Mitanni and Minoans and Etruscans and so on. And we're about to look at the Mitanni here in a minute, and how that they even in this movie made them into Negroids, and they're known to be Aryans and ruled by Aryans. But let's continue. Instead, they present a melting pot theory to imply that ancient Kemet was multiracial, which it definitely was not, for blacks weren't even allowed into Egypt. If you look at the Semna Stele of Sensuret III, it declares clearly they're not even allowed. It says forever. There are other steles that say that the blacks there, now don't get mad because this is just Nubians, it's not the West African primitive descendants that didn't know Egypt existed that are claiming it. But they were worth more as dead than alive as far as a slave goes too, and they just needed their right hand cut off to know that they had killed one of them. And people used to hunt them in certain situations that I won't really go into, but Herodotus talks about the Garamantes and how they hunt the vile Negro troglodytes. Let's continue. The word Kemet means black lands, and it's the black soil as opposed to Desheret, or what we call desert today, and it's got a symbol meaning lands, and it doesn't mean black people in any way. And this has of course been a silly thing that blacks have been trying to say since the start, and then people show them, no, that isn't what it means. And yet thousands of times after being debunked and shown and told, they still go, it means black people. And it's like, no, it never meant black people, for black people weren't even allowed into Egypt. We're sorry, but you didn't even know it existed, so don't get mad. And that usually ends it. Oh, the melanin test thing too. Bob Breyer, Mr. Mummy, look this up. Bob Breyer, B-R-I-E-R, Mr. Mummy, and you'll see that where he makes a real mummy in one of those videos right there. And then, or you could put mummy, or make a mummy. And they take a guy pale as hell, paler than me, and make a mummy out of him, and he turns dark as beef jerky. And they don't even put the shellac on him afterwards and cure him for 3,000 years. But they do run through the exact same noted natron and everything exactly to a T that goes with it, even have writings on some of the bandages and so on. So, they try to put it as multiracial to make blacks happy, but are never going to put them as the rulers of Egypt because they weren't. And so it's terrible that they constantly grasp at civilizations they didn't even know existed. But Diop says that ancient Egypt may have been multi-ethnic, but that doesn't mean multiracial. And well, Diop tried to, even whenever he got debunked, say, well, there's at least some black people there, and then they said, no, not so, and it's actually not multi-ethnic or anything in any situation, and not really multiracial in any way. The multi-ethnic happened much later, and there were no Negroids that were part of Egypt or its founding whatsoever. And please stop, you've been debunked, and you're just trying to usurp something that you didn't know it exists, and it's really looking pathetic. Please stop, because every word out your mouth they're going to be able to debunk, and please stop. So he tells you that he wants to imply that there's multiracial, but it's still an argument that seeks to separate the achievements in ancient Egypt from black Africa. And yeah, none of the sub-Saharan black African areas have any achievement to this area, and you can tell that they only even started to try to mimic it whenever they had cultural, I guess you'd say, examples from other people having shown up there and much help and stuff. Like Queen Tenhanen founded Mali and so on, and we could go through all of them, but there's no need to. Diop says that ancient Egypt may have been multi-ethnic, but doesn't mean multiracial. Even a number of conservative Egyptologists, such as Shomarka Kita, which we would really believe in him, and Frank Yurko, argue that the ancient Egyptians were closely related to the Nilo-Sudanic people like Nubians, sharing substantial genetic admixture. And no, they're saying that the Nubians have some admixture from them, but then the Nubians wouldn't be the Egyptians, and they're never going to tell you Nubians are. They weren't allowed in. It's definitely their enemy throughout the hierarchy of it. They showed up in the first few dynasties. Nubian A colony got totally killed off. Over 400 years later, Nubia C shows up, and they aren't allowed into Egypt through all the way towards the end of that 25th dynasty. That doesn't make you Egyptian. You'll never be called it. And sub-Saharan Negroids from West Africa will never be called Egyptians because they didn't even know it existed. And they didn't have anything like this going on whatsoever, no stonework or anything of that nature. And they really need to quit it. And whenever they said that they closer related to the Nubians, this is in a way also saying, yes, they have a Caucasian phenotype like the Nubians do, and maybe where the people are in Ethiopia today, which, by the way, the Greek name Ethiopia means a whole bunch of places and all the way up towards Russia and stuff, and it really just means farmers and tan people and suntanned, burnt faces, and it never included Negroids whatsoever. But people have taken that way out of context too and tried to say, oh, they have black skin and woolly hair, and actually it's dark skin, like tanned, compared to a pale Egyptian or a pale Greek, and then woolly haired is really curly haired. And so that all of a sudden, wow. But of course, blacks try to interject any little thing they can as a lie and pry open that door so they can steal something on the other side that they didn't even know existed. They like to show these pictures, and I've got individual videos on each one and so much more that debunks it all. Let's just do it right now. And what we're going to do is go to look at the first dynasties. Let's do that. This is the very first dynasties of ancient Egypt, and all you do is you type in blue-eyed Egyptians like you see up there, and you see Hor-Aha, which is the second. This is Horus. This is the second. First one past Menez. A lot of people say that might have even been him, that there's a real question on whether Scorpion 1 and Scorpion 2 was actually Narmer and so on, and an ancient men that was back in this time too that almost goes with Osiris and things. And if you don't know, then you'll never know, and you might covet it, but that guy is no way near a Negroid. And then there's these scribes that have these blue eyes, and all these different statues have these crystal blue eyes at the first part, which shows you they had some amazing stuff going on in those Caucasian Egyptians. And a famous one here, other than King Tut, even the famous statue of Nefertiti has that crystal blue eye, and everything. And so that all connects again with these crystal blue eyes and Egyptian statues like this is Khafre, Hor-Aha, and Sumerian blue-eyed statues, and all these people that were in North Africa and all the people connected. Even pre-dynastic statues here is Nakata-2 period of blue-eyed beads that have a slit cut through them, like drilled through. And here is the famous Nofret, and her husband too, that looks the same way. So we're talking about the earliest of Egyptians and then all the way through, and it has the connections that go all the way through. And there's more blue-eyed guys that were mentioned there. There's at least 16 of them, and they can also show you these blonde and red-haired and auburn and long Caucasian-haired ancient Egyptians from the earliest of dynasties and the mummies that they found. And therefore there is no claim, and it's just a gimp, and real sad. And West African primitive descendants didn't know Egypt even existed. And yeah, all of North Africa and all the way through the Horn of Africa and East Africa and the Nilotic area was all Caucasians in primordial time. You don't look at modern time and then say now is the way it was then, for that would easily be disproved, and has been repeatedly over and over again, but they pretend that they can't hear it. As stated before, black scholars have presented a plethora of evidence suggesting a primarily black ancient Egypt. Well, they think that they did, but what they actually did was show that they have a disconnect in logic, and they can't put two and two together, and they keep calling five and saying sub-Saharan West African primitives were them then, and it just looks pathetic. It's almost like a young kid saying that Santa Claus still exists, and they're so vehement, and they're telling it to their own parents, and it's just kind of odd. For the parents kind of already know, and anybody that knows anything about it, it falls apart quickly and just kind of looks pathetic. So Dr. Chancellor Williams, a black writer, and guess what he's going to say? A historian and sociologist argues that King Tut's grandmother, Queen Ty, and all of her children were black. But I've proven that in many other videos and showed you blue-eyed Egyptians in the very first ones, and it doesn't matter. And if you look at Queen Ty's mummy that they have found, she has long Caucasian auburn hair. They can look at this hair through a microscope, and within seconds they can tell exactly what people this is, and it has nothing to do with Negroids whatsoever. Genetics company DNA Tribes, which has been totally debunked, and they even showed where they made a mistake, and even came out publicly with a thing telling you that they were lacking in S&P knowledges and had made false connections, and blacks still say, oh, I didn't see that. See where DNA Tribes did? And so it kind of looks terrible. But they did corroborating evidence with DNA analysis performed on the mummies of Tutankhamun and his family revealed that the 18th dynasty rulers were more in common with Africans from tropical West Africa, he tries to claim, South Africa, and the Great Lakes region than they do any other group in the world. And yet Spike TV's failed to represent the Pharaoh boy and his family accurately using Caucasian-looking actors and actresses. And yeah, the DNA Tribes got debunked totally. And if you want to see, oh, let's watch what the news said about it at one time. Where is that? And it's kind of muffled because it's from a secondary video. But what I'm going to do is ramp up that volume and put the Dolby thing on so it won't be crackly, a little muffled. Anyhow, what do you got to say here, guys?
Well, there's that research we're hearing today that shows half of all Western European men are somehow related to the Egyptian pharaoh King Tutankhamun. He's Robert Hernandez here with more on this. What's up with this?
It's really interesting, actually. So this is coming out of Switzerland, and the researchers have found that not only do half of Western European men have this connection, genetic profile connection, but 70% of men in Britain, which is astounding. They all have the same genetic profile or same ancestry as King Tut from Egypt way back when.
Isn't that amazing? And I won't show the rest of the video because it shows other embarrassing things. Hell, we might come back to it. But of those 6 reasons now, with me showing the very first ones and how they started out with them blue eyes things, and then what the um genetic shows, and then we look at things like the Nakata culture there and Badarians and the Natufians that had gone in there and mixed together with them, and they all have a blue eye connection in their genetics and possibilities. It starts to make a lot of connections, but then they've had forensic people who can just look at a skull in a few seconds and tell you where this person comes from in the world. And it's simple to categorize these ancient Egyptians by things like that and hair and so on, but blacks still want to grip out at it desperately. So now we go on to actually page 2 that he has of this, rather than just making it one longer page, of the 6 reasons why so-called diverse cast of Tut miniseries is still a whitewash of ancient Egyptian history. So I guess they were lucky to have even them in there, but lo and behold, they're portrayed as the enemy of Egypt. What? Well, Nubians were the primordial enemy of Egypt down in the south, but who they're portrayed ironically as is a much more advanced people known as the Mitanni, and here they are kind of dressed like them. To argue against a black Kemet, Eurocentrics and their Arab counterparts, he says, usually like to claim that Nubians were the eternal enemy of Egypt. And yes, they were, and not even allowed in. And there's decrees and all kinds of things. It was never a good situation for them, and they were always subjugated up under them. And many problems arose from them, kind of like we see in America today, especially with things like this, where they're trying to claim ancient Caucasian societies instead of the actual people that they were from. And so they were repeatedly defeated, these Nubians, and enslaved by the ancient Egyptians. Yes, this argument is often used to claim that the Egyptians saw a racial distinction between themselves and ancient Nubia. No, it really wasn't about race, but yeah, they thought they were vile Nubian troglodytes and they were primitives and so on, and I guess that's kind of similar to the way the West African primitives were found too. The Spike TV miniseries appears to have attempted to make a parallel between, God, I wish you'd quit doing this, but this site sucks. Make a parallel argument with one of Egypt's other rivals by using primarily black actors to portray the Mitanni, who were supposedly Indo-European or Aryan speakers from North Anatolia, Turkey, which is close to Caucasus area, and that would not make any sense. Even if the Mitanni were a dark-skinned people, which they were not, the storyline as it plays out on the screen reinforces the Eurocentric notion that Egypt was a primarily white, olive, or red-skinned civilization that excluded itself from the rest of black Africa and Asia. And really, this would be a more appropriate thing, and here's Gab and Nut and so on. But Diop saw the representation of black people in Egyptian art and iconography throughout Egyptian history. Most ancient Egyptian artwork depicts red, brown, and black people with afros and African-style braids. And no, it doesn't. It depicts red ochre men and pale females, and this goes with exactly the Mitanni that they're talking about, where they show these pale females and red ochre males, and it also goes with Etruscans and Greeks and so on, and we understand this quite well, but they like to omit the light women or say that they must have had white women. They love that one. And so it really kind of keys out the facts quite well. Nubians were also depicted with similar variations in pigmentation. No, they weren't. They were primarily drawn as black, and in a few scenes, they're drawn as black and dark red whenever they're overlapping each other, just like a lot of the regular people are, so it doesn't look like a cluster of arms, but there's a slight variation on a theme, and this still doesn't have anything to do with Negroids. According to University of Chicago scholars who pointed to paintings from the tomb of the Egyptian visitor Hoy, and I've made a video about that because blacks have spoken this, as well as Ramses II and everything else, because we can look over here and, well, look, here's their gods and this pale woman and these pale people and stuff, and look at these blue-eyed statues, and look at this, and how about King Tut's DNA? And then they get real mad and start trying to call Caucasians caveman Neanderthal or something silly like that. The ancient Egyptian paintings sometimes portrayed Egyptian people idealistically are having varying shades of skin color. Diop argued that these phenotypical variances do not represent racial differences, but that the range of blackness that exists in Africa now. And everybody said no, and that's not true at all. And here's cranial and all this information, and you're debunked real quick. And years later, blacks go, well, he said this one time, and it's already been proven that it's a disgusting lie. And please stop. For Diop said it wasn't even West African primitives, just his Senegalese that somehow were these very, very dark Negroids that are shown on the walls with red color and light. And even whenever they went to interrogate him about it, he would not give up the fact that even these pale women and these phenotypes they had going on, and the difference was any difference whatsoever, and it exposed him. Despite ancient Egyptians portraying themselves with various dark shades and light shades and in Caucasian phenotype that exists in Africa, because it was always Caucasians in North Africa and Egypt, to the best that tut makers could do is splatter the backdrop with faux ancient Egyptian artwork that depicts mostly white or light people. And actually there's some dark ones in the thing, and you can see it in workers, but that one scene right there shows some mid-tone kind of workers, and oh no, can't handle that part. Have to just cherry pick the dark ones and then say they're all Negroids, and omit the light ones and the fact that they haven't found any Negroid skeletons. So I haven't even seen this page, but let's see. So here's the way they portray him, and that would have looked about right. And man, he gets pretty damn dark, like on his hand. I mean, I'm Irish and I get fairly dark, but he's got that darkness to him. They're much darker than the wall and so on. He's quite tanned, and you'd think that pharaohs wouldn't be so tanned to get out in the wall so much, but he says is use British accent as opposed to African accent. So why would they have an African Negroid accent? If they were going to have anything, then it would still sound somewhat Middle Eastern accent. But he says Hollywood uses the British accent as the standard when it comes to works portraying antiquity. The Tut miniseries was no different. If a more realistic portrayal was desired, the series makers could have used African accents. The ancient Egyptian language was an Afro-Asiatic language, meaning Caucasian, North Africans, and Asia people, and not Sub-Saharan, and not hooked up to Nilotic or Nubian languages, and not even close to being hooked up to Sub-Saharan Negroid languages whatsoever. Proto-Afro-Asiatic was spoken in the Horn of Africa region and disseminated before the formation of the ancient Egyptian state. And and this is ancient Caucasians and Cushites of the Bible, and that's all about Caucasians, and there's no Negroids in there. The whole Hamite thing is really exposes itself. Just look it up and wiki it, and it'll tell you that they even tried to use it to justify slavery because of what was said, but it was untrue. That they were, of course, all Caucasians, and if one guy got cursed to be black somehow because he saw his father's ding-ding, then who would he marry? Making a mulatto and a quadroon, and go from there, and there never would be a black race to form out of that. So you'd have to write stuff into the Bible, and it definitely says not to. So we're left with either you lie about it, or you lie about it, or you covet, lie, and bear false witness and blaspheme his image. So it doesn't work out too well. But let's continue. In addition, Diop and Obinga linguistically linked Egypt and Africa by demonstrating how the ancient Egyptian language was related to Diop's native Wolof and Senegal language. And they found some words that seemed similar due to loan words and things like that. But there's so much more of that seen in the connection to all the other languages that whenever tried to compare to it, it just falls apart real easily. And he says the overuse of straight hair in Eurasian hairstyles, and this is curly and her hair has been brushed out somewhat, but these are just wigs that they have back then, and he always wants to, or blacks always want to say that that's a fro. And whenever we find the wigs that they have made and they look at the hair that it's made out of, it's not Negroid hair, and ta-doonch, it just all falls apart. But it started with those blue-eyed, incredible blonde Egyptians. Look up Ginger, the earliest dynasties, pre-dynastic, a blonde, pale man. Let's continue. Close examination of the history of hair and hairstyles in ancient Egypt reveals a pattern of similarities that can be seen within African cultures. North African a little bit, but not Negroid cultures, unless you want to talk about how they were pretty much domesticated in Nubia by them, and then you see a filtering of it. But they talk about how those Cushites just literally worship Osiris and Zeus, and this is kind of in the pantheon of Greeks, would be the father and son type situation, and with a reborn sun god thing that's pretty much just like the monotheism of Judaism, which has a father God and his son Jesus Christ, and they become one and the same. So close examination, he says, of the history of hairstyles in ancient Egypt reveals a pattern of similarities that can be seen with African cultures. In fact, such cultural hair practices can only be indigenous to an African continent. And no, I don't believe so. Braiding is seen in ancient times, and of course, Bo Derek and tin with cornrows and everything. Braiding, French braiding, and all of the types of things is nowhere near anything that's exclusively Negroid. In fact, it seems to be the other way around, where they, in trying to get their hair to elongate and straighten and look more like Caucasian hair, do that type of thing. And now they put in relaxers and grease and all types of things to try to get it to look more Caucasian. And quite often, men and women even now are wearing these Caucasian mimicking hair hats, wigs that are made out of Caucasian hair and dyed blonde and things, like Beyonce type looking hair and all that type of stuff. Although straight hair shows up in the African population, really it doesn't unless there's a huge portion of admix, particularly in East Africa, which is where we're talking about, and so they aren't related whatsoever. Ancient alterations to the hair actually bear more resemblance to Afro-textured hair and aesthetics found in African cultures. And no, I've mentioned it, but you can look it up. If you look up Egyptian hair, they're going to show you a lot of bad pictures that Negroids tried to put in and make fun of. But when you look at the actual mummies, there's blonde and red hair and long hair, and there's articles about it, and people have done dissertations on it, like Fletcher and so on. So it really has no stance, what he tries to stand on. And again, he falls flat, or she, Olivia. We can see many of these similar alterations in hairstyles in modern-day black Africans who inhabit Northeast Africa. Man, this site sucks. It's like you can't be on it more than 3 minutes, 4 minutes, tops. He tries to say that you can see these people, this Caucasian type hair all of a sudden. God damn. In Northeast Africa, such as the Afar people. In Tut, the vast majority of the main characters were portrayed as having bone-straight Eurasian hair and wigs, another false depiction that distorts ethnicity of ancient Egyptians. And no, it doesn't in any way, for they didn't look like that. We can look at some of the ancient depictions of them, and if you want to cherry pick, then I'm allowed to too. And so let's just look at what somebody shows as some type of depictions. That's what Negroids' different types look, and there's the Bantu expansion where Negroids lived, as opposed to all of North Africa above the Sahara and through the Horn of Africa. And Beja types don't have a phenotype that looks at all like them, so if you do eventually get to, oh my God, it's them, then it finds out that, oh my God, West African primitives didn't know it existed, and again, we're still stuck in that same pattern. And there's girls that tan real dark, and that's as Caucasian like crazy. DNA of this lady, oh my God, this should have been on the pictures. These are of latest burials and later ones, and shown coming into the Ptolemaic dynasties, and hey, yo, Adrian, I did it. But I'm going to go down to where we can actually see something that's worth looking at. Oh my God. So they've done recreation of her skull, and yeah, she looks like Pretty Woman and stuff when you put all her stuff in. She looks just like her, but if you look at her head on, that's Caucasian. And King Tut's a Caucasian, and they redid him a few different times, and his skull and everything proves it, and his DNA proves it. And they talk about how they built him off of it, and they take this guy and start to build him up, and oh my God, he looks just like Ramses. But that's not Ramses, for once they fill him in, he becomes Nibiru, this other guy at a younger age that dies, and not in his 90s. And he's the chief of the stables back in Tutmosis times. And they've done all types of dental morphology with the teeth, and they find out, yeah, that connects to Caucasians and stuff. And so we were talking about Queen Ty, and this is the mummy of Queen Ty, and she has this Caucasian, soft, auburnish type hair, and that's not Negroid anyway. Neither is her phenotype, and isn't that amazing? And blacks try to show, oh well, this one people that look dark have well, you're not even related to Malaysians. That's Denisovan that does that. Man, y'all need to study up because your lie looks terrible. So yeah, they're closely related to a lot of people that used to be in the Levant, but not the local population. What's that? Those and even Proto-Indo-European early farmers were what made up